This is the internal customer meeting for the verified testing group for July 2020. I have the first point on the agenda, which is just a general update to the roadmap deck. There's really no changes of note in the progress on the epics. We have some longer lived epics right now that we haven't we've made a ton of progress on in the last month. We haven't delivered anything of note that I wanted to call out. And wanted to say mostly thanks again to Grant for contributing the load performance testing MVC, which introduced a whole new category for us, which is just amazing. So really appreciate that. And then really wanted to take some time with Kyle, Joanna, Mech to talk through just how have things gone with our identify failures fast template, the TFF gem. I really think we could dedicate some time to that. I do want to, before we adjourn today, show some designs that we're starting to do solution validation on for the test history in both the JUnit report and at a project level to make sure that this group is aware of those and as we're making progress and iterating on those. So don't let me forget about that before we adjourn. But let's go ahead and jump in. How are things going with identify failures fast? Zeph, do you want to vocalize your point?
Yeah, so I tried to do a simpler integration, one that Albert had identified as a possible target environment to run this in, and that was the customer portal. We did get it enabled and ran it for several days, captured quite a few data points. In the end, it was burning up quite a few more CI minutes than everyone was comfortable with from a value perspective. And that was because mainly for two reasons. One, they weren't actually having that many failures. Of all of the pipelines that were executed, that only caught 3 failures. So it was like a less than 5%, somewhere in that range. And then the other issue was they had just optimized their pipeline, streamlined their test pipeline, so it was knocked down to just under 12 minutes. So yeah, so just to spin up an extra stage for this had a generic cost of 5 to 6 minutes just from the environment perspective. And then the number of RSpec tests obviously was minimal, and that was usually measured in seconds as to how many of those were executed. So we did end up backing it out. There's currently we're trying to figure out how to just integrate it into the specific job itself, but we can't do anything direct. It's just basically going to be stealing the logic and trying to do it in a bash script to check to see if it fails, and if it does, we'll go ahead and fill the job. If not, we'll pass on to the rest of the RSpec tests. So that's where we've landed up at the moment. I'm on rotation this week for our pipeline triage, so I'm trying to spend some time on that, but it's been a little difficult.
Sure. So I just want to make sure I understand, Zeph. So for the project, implementing the template just as is was taking up more minutes than it was saving. And is that against a scheduled pipeline?
Yeah. Well, that was for MRs and trains, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how the template's actually set up. It's
okay.
not for just your regular scheduled runs. It's basically when anybody submits a change. So what we're learning from that is that there's a threshold at which this becomes valuable enough. And I think in long enough running pipelines and pipelines with enough changes where we have a better chance of capturing issues, I think it definitely could provide value. I just think that particular project wasn't the project for it. And I think Kyle's team is still working on possibly integrating it just for GitLab as a whole. So I don't know where they stand with that, unless you have more questions with the customer portal. integration.
My only other question was, how big is the test suite, number of tests wise?
The RSpec jobs, I think there was 270 tests, I think,
Okay.
off the top of my head.
Yeah, we probably need
272. Yeah.
at least a magnitude of order more, I think, before we're going to start to be impactful with running those new tests first versus just being able to run everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it looked like a promising target to begin with because their pipeline was almost twice as long initially. But they had some caching issues that they figured out were taking up a lot of time, and they got that cleaned up just as we were integrating this in.
Yeah, we probably still wouldn't have saved that much time, I think, even with those caching issues, but yeah, good to know. Cool.
Just had one follow-up. Was there, did you, or are you able to look for the reverse of what you mentioned happening? You said that there were 3 times where the job caught a failure and killed the pipeline. Were there any times where it didn't catch a failure and it failed later in the pipeline?
Yes. That happened at least twice, if not 3 times. But the issue is it captured an RSpec failure that was not related to this particular MR.
So it was like a flaky test, kind of got tripped.
That's what it looked like to me. And funny enough, all of the failures were with a particular developer. So this is the other thing that I learned from it as well, is that I think it's going to depend as well on your development process in general that all the developers are following. If everyone's running their RSpec tests regularly, locally, before they're submitting changes, we're not going to catch a bunch of failures, especially if they're like running all the jobs similar to the way we are. And either all the other developers were just excellent and just this one developer is not, or this one developer was just go ahead and pushing it and letting the pipeline catch the jobs instead of running the test locally.
I think we had talked about that in this call 2 months ago, just about like, well, what can we do to push developers to run tests more often? Because that would probably save an inordinate amount of pipeline minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So also in environments where developers are not typically running tests locally, this could be much more valuable from a feedback perspective. Obviously, there's some cost involved.
Cool. Interesting things to ponder. So I guess
Zeph, yeah, so I was just going to ask, in the comment, and I've linked to that down below, I didn't realize you were on rotation, so I could just add it to the feedback issue, because I thought you did a great job summarizing it. But when you said, or when it says like 6 minutes was added, that's just because there was a new stage, so the total time for the pipeline to complete was 6 minutes longer for the majority of the cases, just to be clear,
Yes.
right? Not like 6 new minutes of runtime. It's 6 minutes until that feedback is complete.
Well, I mean, compared to it was 6 additional minutes compared to how long their pipeline was running previously.
Yeah. Okay. So without the, let's just say it took 15 minutes with the template, or 25 minutes, it would take 19 minutes without the job in the template for the total pipeline runtime.
Exactly.
Okay.
What should I reword that in a way to make it clear?
No, sometimes I'll just say sometimes I talk about job minutes, but it doesn't. But there's other jobs that are running simultaneously, so it may not impact the total pipeline runtime. So pipeline runtime might be 50 minutes, but the 6 minutes might be consumed within a stage where there's other jobs running.
So it sounds like both CI runner minutes increased and wall clock time for the pipeline increased.
Yeah.
And that was for green pipelines. In addition, we also found that, or you found that, there was at least 3 cases where it didn't catch something it should have, and 3 cases where it caught something we didn't expect it to catch.
There were 3 cases that caught something we didn't expect it to catch. I don't know if it should have caught the other 3 cases.
Okay.
Yeah, but because we're talking about running the entire test suite for those errors to have been captured.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is what we're trying to avoid.
So I'm not super good at CI, but like Kyle, you were saying, you could run some things in parallel. But if a job is running in parallel, could it preemptively force the other jobs in the same stage to exit if it fails? You know what I mean?
That's a good question. I don't know. I was approached. Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
So like what I was thinking, and I can bring this up. There's like danger, front-end test, Linning, RSpec, and RuboCop jobs all in the test stage for this project. And really, we just want to short circuit the RSpec job because that's the tests that are being failed fast. So the other jobs, in theory, you could use DAG to start them earlier. So danger could provide a review comment, like things could happen to get some of the feedback, but you're still going to block some jobs which were previously not blocked to get that feedback.
Yeah, it'd be kind of neat if almost like if you had a context with cancel and go, and you spun up a bunch of go routines, and you could pass the cancel context to all the other jobs that were running and cancel them like mid-flight with the fail fast. So you could it'd be neat if you could run that job at the same time all the other jobs are running, and then if the fail fast failed, and it should do that quicker than the other jobs would complete, then it could kind of cancel everything in flight and undo it.
I'm sure we could. So that's interesting. I didn't think about that with what we were looking to do with the next evolution of TestFileFinder, but that might be something we consider with engineering productivity, because we should be able to make an API call to stop the other jobs at minimum. That might be something to start with. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't consider that.
If I may jump in, James, do you have any OKR for Q3, or what is the roadmap for the optimization work on your team?
Next up, actually, Albert is picking up the issue that we were going to start in 13.4 and 13.3. I need to jump back into TFF with Drew and see where we're going next with it. Really, I mean, our roadmap is to support Kyle and his team in making use of the gem. And so they're going to really be helping us drive the roadmap for this.
And the reason why I volunteered Albert is just because it'll help us advance on RKRs faster versus waiting until 13.4. Albert was looking for some product development experience too, so it's kind of blended. Things kind of matched up, I think, from a need and desire perspective.
Yeah, so we'll be looking for the next thing then in 13.4 to pull forward. I haven't looked at the epic today or recently to know what that next thing is. And definitely we'll be leaning on Kyle to get the feedback of, hey, how can we help next? Where's the next problem that we can go help you solve?
Okay. So then what is the ops team's effort in this in Q3? Is there any other iteration that we can do versus waiting for the EP team? It sounds to me like the EP team is going to be working on it, and it's not going to be a product facing thing yet. Is that correct?
I think the iteration, like the product iteration on the TFF, is to get an example in the docs. Like that's the first MVC, is to this is how you could use this thing reasonably. And then if the EP team is working on the configuration mapping, then in parallel we could work on examples for other languages, or also we could work with the runner team, because I know Elliot is interested in this a little bit. So if we could get that working for his Go projects, then that would be another small iteration that we could take toward furthering the TestFileFinder specifically.
Okay. Kyle, let's catch up offline, because I'm a bit worried on the headroom of the EP team. And I think mostly on our side, because I think both the ops quality team and your team have had some experience in this. I just want some clarity on clarity on who should be owning, doing what, and I'd like us to move closer to like a functional ownership if we can. But yeah, just concerns on headroom on our side for Q3.
Yeah, and the short version is we're facing either a point where we diverge more from TestFileFinder, where Albert or someone on the team would spend time building up what I'll call the GitLab projects TestFileFinder to do the same function, or we just partner and help add the feature to the product that we would then leverage. So that development work was going to be done by the EP team one way or the other to work towards our Q3 OKRs. I just would rather it be done to help the product instead of kind of waiting until 13.4 to get it done.
Okay. Okay.
Mech, is your question also about our dog fooding efforts?
Yeah, like it sounds to me like our dog fooding momentum will be on pause for a bit because we were waiting for improvements that the quality team has to ship in, right? It's so anything that we can be proud of that this thing has added value to customers, that it reduced the test time. And the first MVC gives us feedback, and it's totally fine. It's great that we get feedback now, but how can we kind of expand this to more projects and not have to wait? Because we only tried with one project. Is there any other areas that we could just like drop this in, and it's helping reduce the time to run tests?
I think I can help with that going forward for other projects, but I haven't given up on the customer portal. So what I want to know is if we're not using the template as is, we're not just including this as perhaps a customer would try to do, and maybe we're just wiring in the gem on the back end for this for short circuiting this RSpec job as Kyle described it aptly. Would we count that as a win for dog fooding since we're using our gem but not necessarily the template?
So dog fooding means it's available to customers out of the box, and if it's in the documentation and customers can configure it the same way we are using, I think that counts. It's not like a one switch. If there's a one switch and like you add this 3 statements and they follow the documentation and they're getting immediate value out of the test optimization, I think that's a win. And then we slowly reduce the gap in the next iterations. Like instead of a switch and like 4 lines of customization, we slowly remove those customization, and in the end, right, you just flip a switch, and like it automatically is baked into your pipeline. And we can proudly say that if you don't use this feature, you're gonna have like 20% more runtime, and just be proud of that. I think that's where the end goal should be. And for me, like I would love to use this in all the projects, like not just the customer billing. I want to use it on GitLab. I want to use it on Runner. I want to use it on Workhorse. I want to use it on all the other projects that we have. The handbook also as well.
So would it make sense for me to continue with the customer portal and work on that RSpec job with that integration and maybe supplement the documentation from a customer perspective so they can understand how to use the gem? Or should we look for another project where it would be an easier fit?
I'll leave that for you and James, because this is the product direction. As long as we're moving towards progress there, I'll leave room for creativity. How you want to do it, but it should be part of the release. It should be in the documentation. I think that's the most important thing, and they can use it. That's what I'm saying.
Thanks for the clarification, Mike.
Kyle, I think you have the next point.
Oh, I just linked to the summary. So okay. we kind of just talked through everything that was in there. I will port that over to the feedback issue that you linked to above. My fault.
Okay.
And then I did find a short-circuited pipeline example that I linked to as well. So just for reference, and that can kind of show you Like you can look around in the project and see the change in the pipelines before and after if need be.
Okay.
Thanks, Kyle. I'll look at that too as I continue on this one.
All right. So I just want to make sure, Nick, it sounds like next steps are, Seth, you and I are going to sync and kind of pick a direction for continuing to go down the project with the template versus pulling out the gem and documenting how to use that to short circuit. I think it's worthwhile to also look at other projects that maybe have bigger suites where this might be more helpful and just better understanding our use case where it's applicable. We'll then circle back with the next steps within the TFF project of where we're going roadmap-wise. I'll work on between now and our next meeting with the internal customers of getting that better laid out of the direction that we're going to be going so that we can all prioritize amongst our competing priorities of how we're going to be working on this as a team. Did I miss anything in there that we talked through or that just blew by me? Great. Anything else that we didn't talk about TFF or the efforts that we're making there?
They'll probably be covered with how you're thinking about expanding, future discussions. I'm assuming we are going to discuss about applying this to other test frameworks as well.
Yeah, there is an issue or issues about expanding this beyond RSpec. All right, well, I'm going to jump into some designs then real quick. We had a great discussion a couple of months ago about test history and wanted to show off the progress that we're making. See if I can find the right screen. There we go. So Juan and I are in the progress of doing some customer interviews and recruited interviews, reviewing this. And so we had a nice long discussion today in our team meeting about this first screen. So the first screens I'm going to show are applicable to the JUnit report in the pipeline. And so showing a job that has some tests and new failures. And we had a great discussion, debate, depending on how you want to characterize it, about what that would look like, different verbiage for that, and what it really truly means, and what a customer would expect to see when they see this. I'll say in the customer interviews that we've done and recruited interviews we've done, there hasn't been confusion about this, but my take is that they're really not sure what this is, so they don't know to be confused. They don't know what to expect on this screen yet. We may, for our MVC, just pull this out and then really focus on history on the next screen, which is as you get into a job and you start to see individual tests, which in the mock, these are all the same named, but these would all be different tests with different names, seeing that status and then starting to see some history here. Juan's already working on an iteration of this column to better clarify, out of those 9 out of 10 that have failed, when did they fail in sequence? Some of the resounding feedback we got was, that's great, but which one failed when? It wasn't clear to a customer or to a user what they really needed to care about. They were really confused about the 9 out of 10 and the green. Like, wait, one of those is red and one of those is green, so I don't know if I need to care about this or not. As we talked through it, we realized, well, what this really shows you is that this one failed, the previous 9, or sorry, backwards. This one passed, the previous 9 all failed. So you had a failing test that you just got fixed. And so you don't really need to care about this one. But this one, maybe if like this was 1 out of 10, this one failed 10 times previously, it's passed, you really should care about that. So Juan's looking at a couple of different options to display this. One is even combining the two so that you have, it would almost look like a pipeline with check marks and X's showing the past history. We may condense then how many appear in this screen or even pull it into another detail screen where you would see the history. We're looking at a couple of different options here. The vision though is that if you have a test that failed, you could see what are some of my past runs. Is it a flaky test? Is it a brand new failure of what's been a rock solid test so far?
Does this history only exist in that pipeline? I assume you're building up, right? So it's like, so pipelines can run jobs can run tests multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the historical scope is within the pipeline, correct?
I know we talked about that quite a bit on this call, and for our quality folks, pipeline would be the most helpful, I believe, or was my takeaway from that. On the technical side, we haven't decided yet where we're going to grab the history from. So not sure.
I see.
I guess
we have heard people that say that seeing it per branch will be also useful, but I think that's more like a philosophical question on whether, both things give you value, right?
Yeah, I think
sorry, what I was thinking is like the pipeline context. So if it's a merge request pipeline, it should be how many times did this test run in different pipelines within that merge request, or if it's a pipeline that ran on master, what are the last n number of master pipelines and how did this test behave there? Not like the last pipeline, because there should just be one, maybe two executions of that test within the pipeline. There might be multiple pipelines for an MR or multiple pipelines for a branch. So that I'm a little confused on that.
Right. I think the idea originally has been always to track or tally against all existing executions of those tests, irrespective of the branch, right? So this class and this particular test assertion, irrespective of branch, has been executed the last 10 times and it has failed 2 of those times, right?
So it's at the project level then?
It's at the pipeline level, I'll say.
But
we haven't
pipelines.
Yeah, we haven't settled on the actual technical implementation because we kind of need to know what people are expecting.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a challenge either way, just because there's a ton of data here. Like storing a JUnit report for these parsings, like each pipeline run right now on GitLab.com produces something like, I don't know, 30 megabytes of JUnit report that we need to parse in order to make this page. So if we're storing historical information about test executions and we try to do that in the database, we're gonna have a problem like right away with that. So it's really gonna be a matter of how can we do this in a clever way where we can maybe only store failures and test runs. And so we can kind of see like, okay, and again, it depends what we want. Like Kyle was saying, if we're just really looking at merge requests, then okay, in this merge request, this pipeline ran 3 times and this test failed 1 out of those 3 times. Like we could do that. The way that I'm looking at it right now is the value comes from looking at a test as being associated with a project, like you were saying, Juan and Mech. So if you've identified that this test fails, out of the last 10 runs, it failed 5 times total across the whole project, the last 5 times it was run, or the last 10 times it was run, then that might be more valuable because that's a better indication of whether that test is flaky or not than just having a smaller sample set. And you could even eventually probably boil that down to summarize statistics about overall, this test fails 33% of the time. So maybe it's not super important that it failed right now.
Right. Joanna, maybe it would be good to run the whole team on the test session thing that we did. And maybe we could, if we don't have to like save the stack trace anymore in our issues and just use this if it lands.
Sure.
So,
well, I think that'll work if we're capturing it at a large enough context, because part of the issue with having our stack trace captures that we currently have in test cases is to give a more complete history to enable us to really dig down and figure out where this actually started. If it's flaky
So-
tests, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I think the next iteration, I think the team is on the right track. The next iteration is in addition to saving the results, the historical stack trace would be really valuable, and we can add from there. So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so this is our pipeline view. This is specific to a pipeline run and from that test back. And we'll solidify between now and the next meeting as well what is going to make the most sense in this view for a developer. I think where your historical stack trace and being able to track that data gets interesting is this view at the project level. So this would be at the project level. This is kind of that first iteration towards here are your flaky tests. And so here are tests at the last 10 times that they've run. Here are the most failures. Here are the most skips. Potentially, it could be another view as one has in the design here. We haven't talked through, but there's probably an interaction here, maybe not in the MVC, but in a follow-up iteration of, great, now go start to pull all of those test pipelines so I can link into them and look at those stack traces because they still exist down in that JUnit data. That could be a really slow interaction for the user because you're going to have to load up all of those individual JUnit reports as you click in. But if you're doing the research, that's probably a penalty you're willing to pay to individually load those JUnit reports to figure out, hey, when did this start failing?
It shouldn't be that slow because since we did the refactoring where we're only loading one report at a time, after you click in, it really takes, like depending on the size of the JUnit report, 1 to 2 seconds to kind of load it in, and then you can kind of interact with it from there. It's not like great, like ideally you'd like to have 100 milliseconds or something when you click in order to load it, but we're kind of parsing a file on the fly, so it's a little bit expensive.
Okay. James, would you mind click on the test case issue 613 under your point?
Yeah.
Here, let me just put it in the chat for us. Or there, yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
So this is our historical view, and would you mind expanding the label bar? Great. So you scroll all the way down. The reason I think it should be by project is that you see the results we track here. We have each of these environments is actually grouped by project CI structure. So if I want to know flaky test in production, it should be scoped towards that historical context. And if I want to look at the flaky test in staging, you just go down a little bit. There should be some more. Right, the next link is staging, correct? So this would decouple this altogether. Because right now everything is in one place, and this test case is really long because we just keep adding discussion points. I think you scroll down, I think there are like 100 something comments that is automated by the bot. So I think separating this out into different buckets of staging and production, which is by project, and it kind of confirms that it should be at the project level, the historical context.
So should it be by project or by environment? Like, should we try and tie this into the releases environments feature?
We don't use environments in our own structure right now. That's kind of where it's blocking, or we're not using the concept of environments in our deployment. So each project is tied to a GitLab environment. So you see Canary, you see production, you see staging.
From a scope level, I think it's better to see the test across environments as well, because if it's passing in one environment and failing in another, you've got an indicator that we have an issue with a particular environment as opposed to a test. So I like the broader scope there, and not limiting it to just how many times this test has passed or failed in nightly alone.
I think they can end up being the same place. We just can't use that granular grouping of environments yet. We would just be using different projects to look at different deployments environment on our end. But I think for the broader use case, I think grouping it by environments makes sense. Do we have a concept of environments in CI right now or in the release? I see.
No, I don't think so.
So
I think
Nick, I was going to say, if I'm looking at this right, you would even need a level up from the project then and say, for our group, here are the tests across projects that match.
I think that can be like 2 or 3 iterations in the future.
Yeah.
I think if you solve us at the project level, that addresses like 80%.
Okay.
And then when we have headroom, you can think of how you want to glue it together into like a CI analytics in the future at a dashboard at a group level.
Yeah.
But in the immediate form, I think like scoping the historical result of a test to the project makes sense, because like as Juan said, pipelines can run multiple times, right? And then can run if you run a test, like what pipeline runs test A in the end-to-end one time, and then when you rerun it, it actually kicks off another pipeline or a job. So we don't really care if it's grouped at the pipeline of the job. I think the whole historical data should be at the project level.
And I think where we're going to end up, Ricky's not going to want to hear this probably, but this design is going to probably split into 2 different issues, or it needs to split into 2 different issues pretty soon, because these designs are really targeted at 2 different users and who have 2 different problems. Where it sounds like yours is more of the team lead user who's looking at the project and historically, what does everything look like overall, versus the developer who's maybe looking at just for my branch and maybe back to my target branch, how is this test behaving? Did I break it? Or historically, is this just a flaky test in the context of my merge request, not in a larger context of how is this test performing historically? Because they just want to know, is this always a flaky test, or is this something I broke and need to fix? So we may end up storing the data differently for the 2 different use cases. I don't think we're going to land in a place where we can store the same data that's used in both views. I don't think so.
I
the
agree.
smarter engineers may, find a great way to do that.
I think we could, but we'll have to think about it some more.
Yeah.
Either way, it seems that we all agree that flakiness, it's a concept that lives at the project level, right? That's how, like, it's not a concept that lives at the at the branch level. If you break test in an MR, that's expected. But if they are consistently failing throughout the project history, then that means that the test is flaky, and that's likely what we're trying to expose here. Is this test flaky or not, right? So
Which can be
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, which can be valuable to developers as well. Just knowing that this test is failing outside of my merge request and the pipelines that I'm executing within it.
Yeah, where my head's at right now is when we're running partial sets of our tests dynamically, depending on the changes in the pipeline. How does that affect the statistics we're gathering about the run for each test? So if this test only gets run ever when we run the whole suite, and it never usually gets run when we're doing partial pipeline MRs, like how does that affect our statistics for test runs? I think we ran into this problem already, Kyle, when we were talking about coverage, because we're not generating complete coverage on every MR pipeline anymore because we don't run all the tests. So we're not going to spend the extra cycles to get the coverage report. So that problem, I think, is going to be pretty interesting, because maybe this test failed once or the last 10 times, but maybe it only ran 4 times today when all the other tests ran 100 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think where we're moving to is the full test suite usually runs in master, and it's going to be as limited as possible in the MR. So that context of project, as long as you're looking at where's the pipeline the most complete, which in GitLab project, I think that would be the main, like, master branch, the main branch. That sounds good. You'll be able to detect flaky there.
I think that these are really great points, and I don't think we should think of it in terms of missing data. I think historical test data should be treated as, a glass half full. You didn't run it, that's fine. We just won't have the data, so we would just list whatever we have, and the branches can just be a filter later on, where, hey, this test A ran like 1,000 times last month. these are like list of branches that it existed there, and then you can add more dimensions later on, like as a filter mechanism. But the primary dimension or character of the test lives at the project level. So like unit test 1 ran like 1 million times last quarter, and it passed 80% of the time, and 20% of the time it failed. And these are the branches that it failed in, which product area, which product team is failing this test. So that's where I'm thinking in terms of like linking the data. So I think at the project level makes sense in that regard.
Okay. Cool.
Just a quick question on that. I agree at the project level, especially for us, it makes sense. James, when you were mentioning at the group level, were you thinking of maybe a company that uses microservices, and each microservice is in their own project kind of situation?
Yeah, we've heard from customers that they want, and this is even like a more aggregated view of all of our tests, how many are passing, how many are failing. And so rolling it up to that level, but also then being able to kind of dig into that in between. So if you have a project that this is our project for this environment, this is our project for this environment, or this is our project for Linux, this is our project for Windows, same kinds of tests are running. Would you want to aggregate those up?
So one thing we heard from Elliot is actually the reverse of what we're talking about. And breaking things out. He was talking specifically about coverage, but I think this is applicable to tests too, because we're talking about grouping, and grouping is important. He was talking about how can he get package level visibility into where his tests are failing or not failing more often, or where he has coverage. So think about the opposite scenario, where instead of a microservices architecture where you have separate projects for each microservice, maybe you have a monorepo and you want to dig down into each individual service inside of that monorepo and get the historical test data for those. Because I think that's a kind of a trendy thing right now in the industry too, and a lot of people are trying to do monorepos. So how can we facilitate both of these things when we're trying to group things by project, but now we also maybe want to group things by like directory inside of a project.
We wrote up an issue, and I can link that back in here as well, or back into the discussion for that issue that Ilya brought up. Cool. We have a few more minutes. Any other topics that we should cover while we have the group together today? All right, I don't see anything else in the agenda. I see everybody else on mute, so I'm going to say no. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ricky and Joanna, as always, for taking notes. Appreciate it. And this will get uploaded to Unfiltered a little bit later today.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thank you.